Welcome to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro, the podcast series dedicated to exploring technology-related insights with market-leading guests. I'm your host, Andrew Giles, and today we are talking with Michelle Gallaher, an award-winning entrepreneur, speaker, and advocate for the Australian health technology sector. In this episode, we dive into the world of health technology and how the application of AI can advance progress in solving the big problems. We cover essential topics for technology partners providing AI solutions in healthcare, from language and governance to navigating cultural challenges and truly understanding healthcare needs before offering solutions. I hope you enjoy the conversation and don't forget to share with your friends and colleagues. This episode of B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro is sponsored by HPE GreenLake, bringing the agility of the cloud to every corner of your IT landscape. Michelle Gallaher, welcome to B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro.
Thanks very much for having me.
Look, it's great to speak to you, and let's dive straight in. So I described you in the introduction based on your bio as an entrepreneur, a speaker, and an advocate for the Australian health technology sector. But how do you describe yourself, and how did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, I guess I describe myself as a disruptor. Well, I'd prefer to say disruptor because what I'm trying to do is to make that, very significant leap for the industry that I work in. But my background is biotechnology, so looking at creating new therapies for people. And then made a bit of a segue, a bit of a sidestep, if you like, into data science and working with sort of new generation technologies to make change. But I guess, how I'd describe myself is definitely a disruptor, but also a maximizer. And that's somebody who, I guess, empowers people to make change and helps to pave the road for others to open up the doors and make that change.
It's really interesting. Whenever I speak to entrepreneurs, there's a trait that I see come through all the time, and that's this unwillingness to accept status quo and the way things are today. It seems to be the case with you as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, very much so. Early in my career, I worked as a clinician, like an optometrist in the health sciences space. And within a pretty short space of time, ophthalmology, the eye sort of business in healthcare, had turned digital. And this was back in the 1990s, because I really am that old. And what I saw straight away was that sense of, am I always going to be behind the eight ball and delivering the therapies that are on market, which have taken 10 years to develop? Or do I want to be in front? And I guess having a very curious mind and somebody that's sort of impatient to sort of be part of that, I decided to, instead of deliver the therapies, I wanted to be in the development of the therapies. But I would agree, I think a lot of entrepreneurs are very much frustrated with the status quo, but also have this real drive to make change and to make change happen in an impatient way, but also in a really sustainable way that can genuinely make a difference.
Yeah, and we're all the better for it. And look, it's really interesting in terms of you mentioned being behind the eight ball, and it looks like the healthcare sector is behind the eight ball. In terms of a big problem that we're seeing here is that figures estimate that 30% of all global data is healthcare related, which is a figure that blows my mind. But I think equally staggering is the fact that scientists spend around 80% of their time collecting, accessing and prepping data repositories. Now, that's got to be a lot of time that could be put to better use, doesn't it?
No, it is. It is. Australia's been really interesting in the healthcare sector around data. So, looking back into the 1960s and 70s, we started collecting data, particularly around things like breast cancer, not really knowing why we were collecting the data. It was just being collected in this way. So that's a really unusual and a competitive advantage aspect of Australia. But certainly in healthcare, it's drowning in data. The data lake is just so enormous, and so much of it is unstructured. So if you remember, you still go to the doctor, and often they'll write notes, even if it's now on screen. Looking back, we've got a lot of doctors that have paper-based notes. And the area that I work in clinical trials, you'd be shocked how much is still on paper, actually. And we've got files, we've got literally mountains of paper. But when you think about wearables and the way that we look at digital health now, all of the technologies that we've got on our wrist or maybe around our chest when we ride our bike, doing the hell ride on a Saturday morning down Beach Road. All that kind of data is sitting there, but we're really not making the most of it. We're really not integrating it into our health story in helping us and our clinicians to make better decisions, but also to really support that biofeedback so as we can participate in our own healthcare.
No, it's very interesting. And look, we're here today talking about AI and cloud technology in particular and its relationship to the health sector. So, from what you've just outlined then, and also given that our audience is a lot of the health tech providers, how can health tech providers position AI to healthcare clients who may not yet understand its relevance to the clinical and operational outcomes?
Yeah, I'm going to talk specifically about clinical trials because that's the area that I work in. So, for people that maybe are not familiar with clinical trials, this is the really critical path that when we've got a medical research discovery that hits the news, it's got to go through typically three phases of trials: phase one, phase two, phase three. And this is to test first of all, the safety of the new therapy, and then the efficacy, and then making sure it's repeatable over large populations in different ethnic groups. So typically it takes 12 years and about between $1 and $2 billion to get a new medicine or a new therapy to market, and about
Wow.
90% of them fail. So straight away, if you're a numbers person, you look at that and go, wow, that's a really rubbish ROI, return on investment. So this is the opportunity of where information systems, big data, AI, whatever you want to call it. This is where we can really use these new emerging technologies to make better decisions in healthcare, but also to really speed up the process. The great thing about COVID, with the COVID vaccines, it did speed up the process somewhat around clinical trials. And it did highlight for us how we're quite inefficient in this system and how new technologies can really help support that system. So, yeah, we are working with a lot of healthcare providers, particularly clinicians who are very, very risk averse. In healthcare, we're very slow to pick up new technologies. Harvard Business Review did a really fantastic study that was published in Harvard Business Review, looking at how slow the healthcare system was compared to other industries. How ready were they for digital transformation? And we're very, very low down on that scale. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And one is because in healthcare, we're risk averse. We're not a make it and break it kind of population of people. But the second part is we're very much about do no harm, and we're
Mm,
evidence based thinkers. So we need to see the evidence that these things work. We're not really prepared to trial things. So I think that's the first thing, to understand the mindset of people in healthcare is they are very conservative in their
mm.
thinking. You will find the odd maverick out there. And so I urge you, go out, find the maverick, go and find the person who's prepared to go, I know there's a better way. I just don't know what it is. I don't know how it is.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Well, from your perspective, you're outlining the problem there, and that time and cost involved in getting to market is quite mind blowing, the scale of it. But what's the opportunity for AI and technology to solve the problem?
Yeah, there's a few areas that AI has already had a really significant game changing impact in healthcare. And one of them is around better decision support. So the first one is solving a time problem, an efficiency problem. So this is around scheduling. You're seeing a lot of AI being used in scribing. So now when you go in to see your local doctor, they may ask your permission to use an AI tool. Fantastic tools. And I've only just seen these come into the clinic in the past couple of years, actually. But we're now seeing some doctors going, time is valuable to me. That's my precious commodity that I just can't replicate. So, any kind of technologies that support time efficiency or decision support, we're seeing a lot of AI, particularly vision AI, coming into things like in hospital labs. So you're looking at cell cultures, and there's a lot of AI robotic vision stuff that is looking at that going, yep, that's a streptococcus, that's a E. coli. That you don't need a clinical scientist to see those things. So that's a great way to shift the focus of these clinical experts onto the more difficult jobs and let some of the AI tools do the mundane stuff and do
Mm,
it fast and do it really accurately. And that's really clever. But we're also seeing AI now right at the beginning in the drug discovery space. And this is about really identifying drug candidates that should be pursued. So we're getting much better decision support at the front end of medical research and discovery. And then the area that I work in is using AI to predict risk and to try and understand how do we design clinical trials smarter. So as we're reducing the amount of money we're spending on trials. So first of all, that's going to bring down the whole cost of healthcare potentially if we get it right. But the other thing is, so as we're not wasting money doing experiments that are designed to fail.
Mm, mm. Look, and it looks the good news is, I guess, that various sources are pointing to annualized growth of AI use in the 40+% a year. So obviously there is great momentum building in the space.
There's a huge opportunity in healthcare, and I really encourage your listeners to step in. Don't let the barrier of clinical language or just not knowing healthcare. Healthcare is just another industry and forgive me, but it maybe sound a little bit arrogant. But of course, we all think in our industry that we're special. We all think, oh no, but it's different in healthcare. It's different because we've got language, or it's different because of it. It's not different. It's just another industry in which there are language barriers and there's concept barriers. But the point is, in healthcare, we have to change. We have to get digital. We have to transform in this space because the cost of healthcare is too high and it's not accessible to most of the population the way that it is. So, digital transformation has to happen, or else we've got a system that's going to be just for the rich, and it's just not sustainable. So my advice is, don't hold back, step into healthcare. We need you.
And that's fantastic, and there are certainly many providers that have their eye on this space. What's your advice for technology to providers to help them help their customers most effectively?
Yeah, as I said before, healthcare is pretty conservative. So you'll see the typical mindset that the average persona that they're dealing with in terms of introducing a new idea or a new technology or a new product or service. They're going to be quite conservative. So they're going to go, show me the evidence of why this works. But I'd say the first thing is, if you can demonstrate that you can either save time or save money, that's going to get the attention, particularly of people that have purchasing power in this sector. In terms of the clinicians, if you're about reducing risk, that's going to get their attention straight away. So they're going to be the ones thinking, is it saving me time? That's great, but is it actually reducing risk? To go in and say, AI makes better decisions, well, we know that that's probably true for a large part of the clinical population, but they don't want to hear that. They want to hear about time and efficiency savings and risk reduction.
Mm. And interesting in terms of the language we're using around this change in the digital transformation. Are you seeing this? I mean, are we talking about disruption or are we talking about innovation in the sector?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said this because this is a bit of a passion area for me. We're
Mm,
talking about innovation. We're talking about incremental improvement. If we say disruption in healthcare, you'll scare the horses.
mm,
So this is about incremental improvement, and that's how healthcare works. Healthcare works on innovation. But then, having said that, of course, my passion is around disruption, and I love the idea of really shifting the entire model to be able to create something completely new and making new markets. That's certainly for, I guess, the people that are trying to create change, obviously at that, far end of the spectrum. But yeah, in healthcare, it is about careful, considered, evidence-based, really looking at the impacts and then making that incremental improvement over time.
interesting. We've got to be careful with our language, don't we? I know we
We
go
do.
down the language path a bit later on, but the considerations for AI for IT implementation in the age of AI. What are we seeing in terms of the I guess the human intelligence perspective and the point of view of when we're dealing with people ultimately and teams? What's the impact on teaming and human intelligence?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the big things we miss in healthcare, we get so focused on the medicines or the therapies, and we often forget about the patient. And also, we think about the patient as the receiver, not as the participant in healthcare. So things are shifting. If we think back to, our parents' generation, there's no way that my mum and dad would ever question what a healthcare provider is telling them. They would say, "Oh, okay, I've got this and I've got to take that medicine or I've got to do that therapy or whatever it is." We're working in a new generation in which, Dr. Google is there, and Dr. Google is actually not a bad thing. I may be a bit heretical saying that, but actually, Dr. Google is not a bad thing. We've got to understand how the algorithms impact our knowledge base. But people these days are doing their research and they're coming into their healthcare provider and saying, "Hey, I've read this. What do you think about this?" This is a real challenge for healthcare providers because they don't have time to read
Mm,
everything. And so they spend a lot more time answering questions as they come in. But I think this is a fundamental shift in our industry. And I think it's a very good thing
mm,
that we're now becoming more person-centered. So for all of the technology developers out there, engineers and software developers have been doing this for years, being very person-centered, making sure that you've got usability and that you've got adoption. We don't think about this enough in healthcare. So I think there's a real
mm,
convergence that's now happening. And I think a lot of healthcare people are looking at developers and the way software engineering has worked over the years, going, "Hey, we need to be more like this." I think healthcare has a lot to learn from
mm,
the technology development industry. And I think the people that are at that point where you're bringing technologies into the clinics, I think you're in exactly the right space at exactly the right time, because I think our mindset in healthcare is now starting to shift. Because if we don't become more person centered and really see patients as participants in their own healthcare, we're really going to lose the game.
mm. And look, that's obviously got to be a change that is for everybody's benefit, doesn't it? I mean, we are talking about
Yeah.
people at the end of the day. In terms of, so again, the way that practitioners are working in the new era of AI, what's the fundamental differences from a leadership perspective in healthcare?
I think this is a very, very, very big deal. And I see this so rarely discussed. So Uh, this is something that I'd love to see more of in healthcare, and is around that digital stewardship or digital leadership.
Mm,
And I think that's a very important piece. We've got quite a few people in the sector that are now starting to think about this. So it's something that, as myself as a technology developer, it's something that I think about quite a lot, is in how do we create not just a product that will solve a problem, but how does that shift what leadership looks like in
mm,
healthcare? So now we're seeing a lot of people in the healthcare sector starting to really understand cyber risk. That was the first thing. They all jumped into that and decided that they needed to reduce risk and they needed to understand the whole cyberspace. But now they're also thinking about data sovereignty and data
mm,
agency. And it's not just about being compliant, it's about creating an understanding at that leadership level around what your obligations are and what good governance looks like. And so we always talk about clinical governance, but now we're starting to talk about digital and technology governance as well. We're seeing people that sit on the boards of organizations like mine. I have come from the clinical space, and they've got to really change their data and digital literacy to now understand how to best lead and govern and steward the space that they're working in, because we don't work in a silo anymore in healthcare. We have to be integrated into platforms. We have to be harmonized on a global scale. We've got to think about, why are we collecting data and how is that data being used, and the structure and interoperability of that data. So the skills required in leadership now in healthcare are completely different
mm.
to what they were 10 years ago. And I'd even say 2 years ago. So if healthcare is not thinking about digital leadership and good quality digital and clinical governance, they're not doing their jobs.
Mm. That's a very good point. There's a great deal of convergence now, isn't there? As you say, the silos are
Yeah,
breaking down, and they have to. Let,
they'll
let's
have to.
let's let's touch on language that we mentioned before. So, in terms of technology partners, technology resellers, and so on that are servicing the healthcare industry, how do they build credibility with healthcare executives? when who and the healthcare executives might not be as fluent in technical language. They might be coming up to speed, as we've been talking about. The change is rapid in only just a couple of years. How do the resellers build credibility with these execs who don't have the technical language yet, especially when they're introducing them to AI?
I think this is a really important point because I think with a lot of healthcare providers and particularly clinicians, they're very, very time poor. So if you go back to the old days of pharmaceutical sales, you would have the opportunity to go in and talk to a doctor, and maybe you would have half an hour. Now you've got like 2 minutes.
Mm.
It's like, are you in? And what are we talking about? Or you're out. So I would really encourage people that are working in this space to think about really starting to learn some of that clinical language, particularly the clinical language around efficiency, but also not just language, think about concept as well. So the big thing to remember about clinicians is they're time poor. And they want to, their most important thing is to spend their time with the patient, not to spend their time with other people. Recognize too, in the healthcare sector, you've got, and we talk about them all the time, as key opinion leaders. And you will get some clinicians that are key opinion leaders and great advocates of this technology. And it's usually about time and money efficiency or reducing risk. And so it's about finding those people. So do your homework, do your research, and find who those KOLs, key opinion leaders are, and start getting in there. There's quite a few. You look at conferences now that I go to. I was at one in Brisbane last week around clinical trials, and in the room, I'd say 90% of the people in the room are, yeah, I'd say laggards in the kindest way.
Mm.
But when it comes to digital, and then you've got probably 10% of people in the room like me who are like, yeah, let's talk about technology solutions. So don't get too bogged down in the technology. I work with a lot of med tech companies, and we often have this mantra of don't fall in love with the technology, fall in love with the problem that you're trying to
Mm.
solve. Really understand the problem you're trying to solve. So to go in there and say, yep, I respect your time. I know that time is precious and you want to spend more time with the patient, straight away, you're on the same plane as anybody in the space. But also remember, in healthcare, the decision making and the purchasing power dynamic is complex, really complex. They move slow. It's going to be a really slow sales cycle. And you're probably going to have to go and do the beauty contest with them a couple of times so as they get to know you. The second part is it's all about service. It's all about service. And so in the area that I work in, ophthalmology and clinical trials, we've got a lot of kit. It's great kit. It's great technology kit. And the one thing that I hear my team talk about all the time is the quality of service. And so they would much rather buy the technology that is maybe not all the whistles and bells, but the service team is first class, really, really first class, because they don't want to be left with a technology and only using it to 10% of its capability, or not having the ability to modify something to really, really suit their need. So that's what they're looking for. They're looking for a relationship, because healthcare is all about
Mm.
relationships.
Getting back to people again and the human side. Um, it's interesting you talked about, opinion leaders and people within the healthcare side, to build relationships with. Who let's have a look at the, I guess, again, from a channel partner perspective and the go-to-market messaging that they need to create to resonate with the various healthcare personas. So, let me know, what are the personas that we have there? We've got clinical leads, I'm assuming, IT leads, and procurement. How do they best approach these various personas?
Yeah, I think the way in is if you can get to the clinical key opinion leader, get to that doctor or allied healthcare professional, or maybe even nurse manager who is
Mm.
looking to save time and save money. You can find them at conferences because they're the ones sort of talking about technology when other people just aren't. And they're the ones who can often put internal pressure on the system. When doctors advocate for a technology solution, procurement people sit up and listen, because their thing is, particularly in the public system, they don't want to lose their doctors. There's a lot of competition for that talent within the system. So they're looking for ways to keep doctors happy, and particularly allied healthcare people happy and in place. But also hospitals, healthcare is always under the pump. Healthcare is dependent on government funding or dependent on activity funding. And you speak to anybody, look at any news service, and they'll talk about healthcare being underfunded or healthcare long waiting lists or inefficiencies. Efficiencies is our language, it's our system of language. How do we change? How do we create quality systems that are more efficient? So I think getting into the clinicians, because they'll drive change, that they're the ones who'll do it, or the unit nurse managers, they're often the business brain in those clinical settings, and they'll make that change. Going straight to people like the CFO, if you can get anybody in that, and that business unit is always a good thing. But look for the chief medical officer in any kind of organisation and see if you can. They're hard to speak to. These people are so it's not about you. It's they do want to speak to you, but it's really hard to get in front of these people. They do read. A lot of these people read widely. So you'll find key opinion leaders in the background will be searching for information. So use digital communication channels to tell the story as well. So it's not just face to face, which is often our mode of influencing people towards making a decision to purchase something.
Mm,
Think about what's the digital content that you could create that will get in front of the eyeballs of these people. When they sit on planes, they read. When they're at home at night, they read. But the key opinion leaders in the clinical setting are looking for information. They're searching for information all the time.
that's fantastic advice. If we jump into the real world considerations of technology implementation now, how can businesses and their technology partners navigate their way through to finding the optimal solution together?
I come back to learn the problem, focus on the
Mm,
problem to be solved. So my background, I'm clinical. I'm not a data scientist, and I'm not. I can't code. And my kids will tell you that I can't even use the remote control on the new telly that we just bought. I wish I had bought a simpler telly, but I do know the problem to be solved. And so, what I've loved about the last 10 years, I guess, of my career, in which found the problem to be solved, and then I went looking for the technology solution. And also point out that there's a beautiful degree of naivety that is very, I think, attractive in clinicians that search for solutions. And there's quite a few in my network that we've done this. So I encourage you really, really understand the problem to be solved, because straight away you're on the same language plane. And in my sector too, we often talk about there's great technologies out there looking for a problem to solve, but instead we sit on the other side where we go, we know the problem to be solved, and we go shopping for technology. So we assume that there is a technology out there, but sometimes there's not. And where I was back in 2019, the problem that I needed to solve was how do we get that failure rate of clinical trials down from 90% to maybe 50%? How do we stop this huge spend in medical research that's going into failures, rather than why don't we be more efficient with that money? If we could just change the design and use data and systems to design smarter experiments, maybe we would change that failure rate. So for me, I didn't really care about the technology. I just cared about the problem. So I just kept communicating my problem over and over and over again to the technology developers that I had sitting
mm,
in front of me until they got it. And I honestly didn't know whether I had the right technology solution or not. But when we started experimenting and started to really build the solution ourselves, I'd, I look back now and I go, I wish I'd done more research looking at the different technology solutions that were already on market and how I could have modified them. So
mm,
I think that to me is kind of where we're seeing this convergence now, that
mm,
I'd love to think that we can't expect the solutions to just be on a shelf in healthcare. So I think there is a real understanding and a mindset that we probably have to create or modify a current solution to fit healthcare. But I come back to my first point. As much as I like to think healthcare is special and unique and important, it's just another industry. It's just another set of
mm.
problems to be solved.
That's very interesting. I mean, the need for change, the emphasis for change and doing things differently, we've covered a lot of areas already, but does the business market fundamentally have outdated processes for evaluating IT, solutions that just don't fit our current era anymore?
Oh, yes, we probably need a bottle of wine now. But, yes, and it's so frustrating. It is so, so, so frustrating. First of all, the time. It's glacial to sort of get through that process of procurement. It is just glacial, and the paperwork is enough to make your hair curl. But your listeners know that better than I do. Uh, but I think, yeah, there has to be some better decision. What I'd love, here's my wish list.
Mm,
What I'd love is for healthcare services to have people embedded within the service that can actually look at technologies and do that triage,
mm,
working out and to be proactive rather than reactive, to be able to say, wow, I've just seen this new decision support software over here that we could be using in our pharmacy practice. Or, there's something over here we could make better decisions around communicating with carers of patients going through cancer treatment. So, but instead, it's so reactive in our
mm,
space. We just go, oh, God, yeah. And we keep getting hit with all these new technologies. So, I'd love to see people in the healthcare system that are, I guess, our people who can make some really smart decisions about, look, there's a technology out here that you guys should be looking at rather than just responding to everything. So I guess, yeah, my message here is be really patient with us, because
mm,
our procurement and our evaluation systems are working from a very low base here. We don't have your language. We don't have an understanding of the concepts of just how powerful a lot of these technology solutions are. And because we often don't have the language of, developers too, we don't know what can be modified and what can't be modified. So my similar message to the healthcare sector is, don't be afraid to ask the dumb questions of the people who are standing in front of you with a technology solution. Don't be afraid to ask, hey, could you do this or could you do that? Rather than, I say to clinicians all the time, you don't need to know the language of data science and business intelligence around business intelligence systems. What you need to do is focus on your problem and communicate your problem well, educate, because the technology people will have the solution or they'll know how
mm.
to create the solution. So it's about, yeah, creating that sort of convergence, but around, yeah, evaluation systems, boy, yeah, surely there's a technology solution for
Hmm,
that.
yeah. Look, I think it's really interesting you use the analogy of triage from medical, to actually assess the the IT side as well. So it's learn from what they already know well. So the flip side of that is, do technology partners need to change how they respond to their customers to get to the outcomes in the health space more effectively?
Look, I'll probably say yes, but maybe not really understand how. Sort of, I guess,
Mm,
recognizing that we're very, very time poor in the sector. Uh, so I'd say, to be really specific, I think email is a million times better than phone. You won't get very many clinicians picking up a phone.
mm,
Maybe if they're in the business units, they might, but they'll probably delegate that to somebody else to pick up the phone. So I'd say, email is your best friend. A lot of people in healthcare, and this is a work-life balance problem that we've got, is that they'll be responding to emails at 11 o'clock at night. It doesn't mean you have to respond at 11 o'clock at night, but it means that's when they get the time to read the content, and that's when they get time to contemplate and look at things. I think the best place to talk to clinicians and healthcare people, particularly clinicians, is at medical and scientific conferences. And I wish more technology people were present at those conferences and speaking at those conferences. In terms of how do you get in front of some of the business leads within the healthcare system, they're more likely to pick up the phone and more likely to respond to emails in normal time, but they're often not the opinion leaders and the drivers of change.
What are the traits in your mind that make a channel partner stand out when healthcare providers are selecting an AI or a tech provider? What are those traits that really, really differentiate?
Yeah, it's healthcare is still a person to person business system. We like to stand in front of each other and make
Mm,
direct eye contact and shake hands.
mm,
So it's still very person to person in the space. When I talk about service delivery and service delivery systems and service delivery promises that are made in the space, I think this is a big one. This is a really big one. What I see, the technology, we're going through a bit of a triage system at the moment in the business that I'm working in, and we've invited a whole lot of technology developers to come in for 20 minutes and pitch their solution. And I've maybe done something that is a bit different in the sector, but I've actually written a brief for all. So I know what the technologies are, but I've written them a
Mm.
problem brief. Here's the problem in our business that we're trying to solve. So when every technology person comes in and does their 20 minutes in front of my team over the course of a day, hopefully they're responding to the brief. And hopefully they start off by saying, as I understand your problem to be solved, it's this. The second thing that we're looking for in the triage is the relationship. So I have a bit of a mantra that we do more business with people that we like. So it's about the relationship. It's about,
Mm.
can I talk to you? Can I tell you the dumb things? I'd love to be able to tell you how I mucked up your technology, how I pressed this button and then this thing happened. Um, we do tend to lean into people that can really hear us and really listen to us, people that we can have a real relation. It doesn't mean you have to be
Mm.
best buddies, but um, in the health sciences, we're the sort of people that hate getting stuff wrong, whereas in the technology space, they love getting stuff wrong. They love, that iteration. They love that stage gate methodology where it's let's do this, come back, evaluate. In healthcare, we don't do that.
Mm.
We get it right the first time.
Mm.
We make sure there's no mistakes. So it's a fundamental difference around how that works. And the same with service level as well. Excuse me. I think if in that triage process, we can see that there is a real desire upfront to make sure the problem gets solved, not just plug and play. That's probably what makes the difference for us. And then having that quick response time. Do you have a service desk in Melbourne? Will somebody actually come out and help me with this piece of equipment? Do you have training modules? So we're learners in healthcare. We love learning. In fact, we're a bit addicted to it. We
Mm.
just love it.
Mm.
So the more content you can create in learning modules, whether it's online videos or whether it's webinars or whether it's, podcasts or whatever it is, we love that kind of content. We adore it, in fact.
Mm. It's really interesting that having this conversation with you, you really get a feeling over the course of it that we've got these two cultures coming together. It's almost like you're looking at culture, that we see more broadly, international cultures and those sorts of things. But in many respects, it seems like we're analysing two different cultures and how do we understand their norms of communication and things of an operation, and then how do we adapt, just as you would in international business, for example.
This is so true. And it's funny, I've actually never had this conversation, and I wish we could have more of these conversations around culture. I had a business that I merged with another business, and the group that I had in Melbourne were all clinicians. And funny enough, they were mostly younger women, and they had all come from a healthcare background. And they're all super, super smart with PhDs and MBAs and all the rest of it. And then the tech team that I had were mostly from the US, and they were mostly young men, and they were extraordinary data scientists and coders and developers. They were amazing. And I had to merge the two businesses
Mm.
together. And this is probably one of the hardest things I've ever done in my career, is about how to build the culture that would really support change and efficiency. How was I going to mesh these groups together? So of course I made the classic mistake of just telling them to and hoping that they would, and they just didn't. So first of all, language was a big barrier here.
Mm.
And of course, I had the people on my clinical side going, oh, I need to go and do a master's in data science. And I said, no, you don't, actually. You don't. You just need to be physically in a room with these guys and start to understand their language. But of course, they couldn't help
Mm.
themselves. And they're like, we want to do training on R Suite. We want to get into all of these platforms. We want to learn how. One of them actually did go and do a master's in data science, which blew my mind. But that's typical of that
Mm.
mindset.
Mm.
They desperately need to know how the machinery works, and they
Mm.
never will, but they They needed to get that, but they got language. And then
Mm.
on the data science team, they'd come from the banking sector, from risk sectors like superannuation, and looking at systems integration, systems architecture. So they were all about structure and form,
Mm.
but also they had a mindset, a stage gate mindset of let's make it and break it and then learn from it and iterate to the next thing.
Mm.
And when I realized that this is what these guys were doing, we had a major explosion, because on my clinical side, they're saying, well, you're not allowed to do that in healthcare. You can't just make it and break it. We're talking about people's lives and not getting stuff wrong. And then the developers on the other side are saying, well, then how are we going to learn if we don't make it and break it? So we had
Mm.
this we had to really slow down our systems. But it sounds really funny, but part of it was social as well. We actually needed to bring these cultures together socially
Mm.
first and build that social relationship. And then the language, finally started. But I was really observant of the language. In my clinical team, they were calling the developers cowboys. Oh, they're cowboys,
Mm.
which was derogatory, actually. And they're not cowboys.
Mm.
They're trialists. They like to
Mm.
make stuff, see if it works, and then come back and do it again. And then on the data science team, they were calling the clinical team the handbrakes, because they were forever pulling the handbrake on, going, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do
Mm.
that. So that was some mediation. So I was the ref in the middle, trying to do the mediation between the teams, going, all right, sure, this is how you see them, but do you understand? Yeah. So in a way, we had to do a
Mm.
little bit of persona mapping inside our
Yeah.
business to make sure we had those communication systems right. And then when we did, the change and the development just exploded. It really took off. And then we would have the teams laughing at each other, going, oh yeah, well, now you guys are the cowboys, and haven't we, pulled you across to the dark side? So we
Mm.
still had this language barrier between us, but we at least made momentum. At least we got our technology developed and we got it out there. But I couldn't stress more the importance of culture in
Mm.
bringing convergence together and making it stick.
Yeah. Yeah. And the role of the cultural interpreter.
Yeah, I never saw
Mm.
myself as that.
Mm.
Funny enough, I've got a Labrador retriever, and I would take her to work every day because she was head of culture. But
Mm.
funny enough, she actually was a bit of a linchpin. Having dogs in the office really sort of changed the temperature a bit. But
I can
yeah,
imagine.
I
Mm.
I think this is where we see convergence really fail,
Mm.
because there's that real lack of understanding, not just about the problem to be solved, but how people work and how people speak, and the language and the systems of thinking in those two sectors. And if we can get that right, we could move at pace.
Mm. It's fascinating. If you had one piece of advice for a channel partner wanting to break into healthcare with AI solutions, what would that be?
Do the research. Do the
Mm.
research around the problem. And if anybody sort of contacted me as a clinician and said, is your biggest problem recruitment of participants into clinical trials? I would sit back and go, oh, thank goodness, somebody's done their research here, rather than just jumping straight in and telling me about the technology solution. Uh, we all want to be understood. It's a very human endeavor. We want to know the future, but we also really want to be understood. We really want a supporter. We really want a champion working with us to solve the problems in our business. Everybody, I think, turns up to work every day wanting to do a good job.
Mm.
And I know certainly in the technology sector, they're curious. They want to see efficiencies. And I think one of the great sort of bugbears in the technology sector is, why won't these people just adopt it? Because it will solve their problems. So I think it's building that very human element of understanding each other's problems and really doing the research. So I'd encourage anybody listening, do the research on the sector and really understand the problems, not just the people, but really understand the problems to be solved, and then go into, and this will save time, and this will save money, and this will reduce risk, and here's how easy the solution is to adopt.
Mm. That's fantastic advice. One final question for me is what's the mistake that you see partners make when they're trying to enter the healthcare AI space, and what should they do instead?
Mm. I think the biggest mistake that I see there's a couple. So one of them is not providing enough written material or content for me to contemplate, because I like to do my research on technology quietly and on my own when I've got the chance to do it. I mean, everybody, we love to talk about our solution. We love to get up there in front of somebody and say, here's what I can do for you, here's what I've got. So that's the first thing is I often look at technology solutions and say, can you give me some case studies? Can you give me some specs around the technology? Can you give me some information about what other people similar in my sector have done with your technology? Can you introduce me even to people that have used your technology so I can talk to them face to face? We love to do our research, but there's very little written or not enough written content. So I'd encourage case studies are great because again, that's our language, like triage. We love case studies. I think the other thing is just assuming that clinical people know about the technology. We're really not. We're really naive. We sit in our time pressured bubbles, particularly if we're seeing patients, and we don't have time to deal with it. Clinicians have a lot of problems just getting up over the top of new medicines that are on market and which ones have been taken off. Because these days, sales reps rarely get in front of a clinician these days. So they've got to do that research themselves. So if we can't get on top of the new medicines that are in our sector, we're never going to get on top of the new efficiency technologies or, support technologies that are coming into the sector. So there's that. So and I think the third thing is too that um, assuming that we have time, that we just don't have time. And so in terms of finding that KOL who's really motivated to learn about the technology, I think that that's the kicker that I wish more technology people would just approach me and go, hey, who should I speak to try and get this in here? Or have you seen this? Could you recommend somebody for me to talk to about that? But I think picking the right person and picking the right time and making sure you've got that support material somewhere to allow a clinician to do their own research.
That's fantastic advice, Michelle. Thank you very much. And look, this has been a really tremendous conversation with great insights. Thank you into the healthcare sector. I've really enjoyed it, and
Oh, it's a
I'm sure
pleasure.
there's lots of value for our technology partners. Before we wrap up, I have some questions I'd like to ask you for our segment that we call 5 in 5. Okay, so I ask our guests the same questions, and I'm looking for 5-second answers. Are you ready for the challenge?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. What book, app, or show would you miss most on a desert island?
Bean hunter. So I'm a coffee snob. I'm from Melbourne. So, but then on a desert island, there's nowhere to go, is there? So I would say probably therefore the app that I would miss the most would probably be Instagram or something like that.
Mm,
So keeping in contact with my kids and my family.
absolutely. Now, what is your favorite movie featuring AI? This is right up your alley.
Yeah, her. I love this movie. It was funny, my son recommended it to me because he's a real cinephile, so he loves that sort of stuff. But, one of the really old movies, it's not AI, but it's technology, is Giorgio Verber's Metropolis.
Uh,
So way back in I don't know, have you seen that? It's very German, it's very wonderful,
I
very
haven't.
1930s, 1920s, but it was all about, how, artificial intelligence in those days would really change society. I love Metropolis.
Would love
Mm.
to see that, given where we are today.
Mm.
Okay, the third question. What does your social media algorithm think you're obsessed with?
It depends what day you look at it, but right now it's obsessed with mummified bodies.
Oh,
So I think that's a bit morbid, isn't it? So I don't know what it says about me, but I keep getting and there's a lot of bodies that have been found around the world that have been preserved in bogs, and so it's yeah,
so it's
interesting.
a clinical fascination for you?
I don't know. I don't know how that happened actually, because I don't even remember actually Googling, "Tell me about a mummified body in
Yeah.
Mexico."
All right, that's an interesting algorithms are interesting, aren't they? What piece of outdated tech do you miss the most and why?
Oh, see, I love records. I love vinyl. I'm a bit of an old
Mm,
school, dance queen. So I love the old record players and the simple, beautiful technology. I love the smells of vinyl. I love everything
Mm.
about it, but I still have my whole vinyl collection and I still have a turntable out there.
Fantastic. It's probably appreciating value too.
Maybe the record collection
Yeah,
does.
coming
Yeah.
back now. And final question, if you could share one game-changing productivity tip to save time, what would it be?
It would probably be around scheduling. So I'm rubbish with my diary and managing my diary. So sometimes I still go back to the paper diary, but I kind of need I almost need a technology that can set off an alarm and say you're about like my car when I'm
Mhm.
about to crash and that slams the brakes on. I need somebody to slam the brakes on my diary and go, you've got your diary's a mess. You need support here. Maybe that's just a person. Maybe that's just an EA that can actually do that and sort of shift my diary. But I know that would make me so much more efficient.
Fantastic. Michelle Gallaher, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us on B2B Tech Talk with Ingram Micro.
You're welcome.
Thanks for tuning in, and a special thank you to HPE GreenLake for sponsoring this episode. You will find links to additional information in the show description, and don't forget to share and subscribe. We'll see you next time.